My assignment was to orient and talk a little bit about two things, the philosophy of the school and the history of the school. So I'm going to give you each a copy of the philosophy you have in front of you, and I'll refer to it as you go along. You can read it through right now. Then everyone will have one. And I'm always happy to do it because it's near and dear to my heart. And I start with the premise that a school is basically made up of the people and the relationships among those people and how we are with one another. And that there are too many schools in which rules and regulations define the school. But for us here at KCA, it's the philosophy statement that's our guide. An orientation to the philosophy is essential, as is revisiting it on a regular basis. And one of the reasons is, historically, if we look back at our population, each year about 1/3 of our student population is new to the school, which means 1/3 of our parent population is new to the school. And historically, about 1/3 of our faculty has been new to the school. This year's the happy exception. We only have one new faculty member and a new development director, and everybody else is returning. So that's been a real nice thing for us this year. I had never thought about it too much until I was quoting those figures to someone. He said, "Can you imagine how a business could have continuity if they had 1/3 turnover every year?" And I thought, oh, that's right. And so the continuity for me, and I think the continuity for us, is the philosophy statement that undergirds and underlies everything that we do. One of our parents, in fact, it was Jody Wilkins, said to me once after her kids had been in school about 1.5 years, we didn't choose the school because of its philosophy, but once we got here and heard about it, I became bitten by it and just absolutely fascinated with how it works. And so that's the sort of the impetus, I think, for asking me to come to share some reflections and thoughts about philosophy and the history of the school. And so ultimately what's required is that everyone live by the philosophy as a guide. That we see it's kind of the glue that holds KCA together, as diverse as we all are. And we value our diversity, we value our individuality, but we have that common foundation of the philosophy statement. It usually takes living with it and within it for about a year to begin to get it. The students come here initially and they're pretty enamored of the freedoms, and it all seems pretty utopian to them. And then they test it out and see if it's really for real. And they learn and grow in it and take more responsibility for the philosophy as they get older. And so it comes with experiencing the philosophy and then reflecting on our experience in the philosophy. And those who have experienced it have to make it live for the next group that comes. So that's why that orientation and revisiting it is so important, because the philosophy lives with the people who are here and the people who are new and incorporated. Then in a year or two, they have to make it live for the other people who follow and come in after them. Those who have experienced it can be frustrating sometimes, because there are always those coming into the school room that's new and having to learn it. And once you've sort of got it, you want everybody to get it. And it's a process, and it happens over time. And so we'll hear from the students, well, KCA has changed, it's just not like it used to be. Well, what's changed is the people, but the philosophy is the same. And the other thing that has changed is their perspective. As they've matured and come to understand the philosophy, and they take more responsibility for it, and they care about it more deeply, then they see it from a different perspective, and they begin to think it's changed, and it really hasn't changed. It's just the perspective on it has changed. So whether you're new, experiencing KCA for the first time and needing orientation to the philosophy, or whether you've been with us a couple of years and need to just continue appropriating the philosophy, or whether you've been with us 6 or 7 years and it's a time of reflection on the philosophy, this kind of meeting's for you. Our challenge is to strive to make the KCA philosophy a living reality. And you'll notice as you glance down the 3 sections of the philosophy, each section begins with "we strive." We don't have any illusions to think that we are, at any moment in time, as perfect and as wonderful and as utopian as the philosophy sounds. But we do take seriously the obligation to strive to make it a reality and to evaluate what we do based on that. So it's our vision, it's our goal, it's our ideal. It's never fully realized, but it's always there as a guide. And the question is not how does another school do it, but how must we do it in order to be faithful to our philosophy. And given that, I think it's important for you to know a little bit of the history as to where this philosophy came from. Because it didn't come from a bunch of education professors sitting in a classroom at a university hammering out theoretically what a school should be like. It came from lived experience. Back in, it was grounded in experience. It was rooted way back in 1904 when the Sisters of Loretto founded Loretto, Kansas City. So those of us who experienced Loretto School lived through a tradition that was influenced by those Sisters of Loretto and what they believed in. And we hadn't really ever articulated. Somehow we knew to our bone what the Loretto philosophy was, but our tendency was to say to people, that's not the Loretto philosophy. We get upset about how something was going to say, that's not the Loretto philosophy. And it occurred to me as I became principal that we needed to be able to say, what is Loretto philosophy? And what is it that we believe in so passionately that we get so ruffled about it, somebody goes against it? So we started a process, and it was Mary's first year at Loretto, and we started the year with a new administration that was coming in with kind of a top-down authoritarian mentality, which wasn't fitting with the kind of collegial participatory process we all loved and believed in. And lots of unfortunate things happened in the first part of that year, but out of it, I was appointed acting principal in December of '81 to finish out that school year. And I invited the upper school students, faculty, and parents to sit down and to articulate what was it that was the philosophy, what was it that made the school so valuable and we cared so deeply about it. And out of those conversations came the basic framework of this philosophy statement. This is people speaking out of their lived experience, what it was they valued about the school that made it worth fighting the grave for. I mean, we took it really seriously. And after we had done that, and then we began to use that then as a backdrop for decision making, we broadened it, did the same process with the middle school faculty and the lower school faculty. And there was so much excitement generated from that, because what we realized is we really did have a common understanding of what the school is about. We just never really articulated it. And we kept seeing a group would go through the process, and they would say, well, I agree with everything that's here, but I also really value thus and such, and we'd check it out with everybody else. Oh yeah, we should have thought of that. And so it wasn't a debate, but it was more of an affirmation. So we finally, the last step was to do with the board of directors. And they went through the same process and basically affirmed the statement and added a couple little lines of their own that everybody else affirmed. It became then the document that was guiding us in those years of '81 to '84. But the escalating costs and the declining enrollment and the change in administration and the lack of Sisters of Loretto being there to serve the school, lots of things came together, and it came time for that school to close in 1984. But a few of us, diehards, crazy ones, whatever you want to call us, couldn't let it die. And it wasn't that we needed to start another school like any other school in Kansas City. We needed to start a school that was faithful to this philosophy and carried it out on a daily basis. So as we began KCA, we considered this our founding document, and everything was important that flowed from that document. So when we set up our board of directors, it was important that it be a collegial process, that there be representation, that there be students and parents and faculty as well as community people on that board. So when we came to those tough decisions, whether it be salaries or enrollment or whether we could open the doors the next year, it was a we decision. All the constituencies are represented, and we were all making a decision. And there'd be those times when some of those early years in finance was really tough, and the business people sitting on the board would say, it can't be done. You know, there's no way. Bottom line is, you can't continue to operate this organization. We just have to close the doors. And the students and the parents and the faculty say, no, there's got to be a way. And we creatively together come up with a way that would involve everybody taking ownership for the challenge. And though while we knew the best case or the worst case scenario, we worked towards the best case scenario, and with creative problem solving, we kept the door open for 15 years. And I think now we're in a pretty stable position. So the governance structure of the board comes from a part of this philosophy we'll go over in a minute. The fact that at our board of directors we have co-conveners that rotate rather than having one president of the board, but we have a president for signature purposes that are chairing the board, which rotates from time to time. The secretary rotates from time to time. I hear there may be a little change in that this year. But giving everybody the opportunity to be a learner in the process. So as I said before, the question is not how do other people do it, and therefore how should we do it, but how must we do it in order to be faithful to the philosophy that we brought forth as our founding document. And it's a process. It's a process, and as I have said many times when I was serving as principal those first 11 years, a snapshot at any one moment might or might not be something I was proud of. But what I was always proud of was the process. I think when you were patting Mary on the back for the letter she sent out, there were moments of that during that process where a snapshot's like, that's not the school we wanted to be. But what we wanted to be was the process and how we processed it and how we handled it and how we worked it out and how we resolved it in a way that was respectful of everybody and also had the right consequences involved. So if you take a look at the philosophy statement, it's in 3 sections, and I see the 3 sections. The first one kind of being the internal KCA community. The second section really directing our curriculum and the learning. And the third section dealing with society and life beyond KCA. And if you talk to students and ask them what they value about the school, most of what they'll talk about is the things that are in that very first section where they experience being a part of a caring community of co-learners. And we were real deliberate in choosing the phrase co-learners as opposed to students and teachers, because it's clear to the faculty that we learn from the students learn from us, we learn from each other, the students learn from each other, and so we chose the term co-learners as a way of emphasizing that. And that the uniqueness and worth of each individual are unconditionally accepted and respected. Just that basic premise of the sacredness of each unique self, I think is, I hope that you always experience your son or your daughter as being treated as with respect and acceptance and belief in the potential of that human being. We value diversity, and diversity is celebrated, whether that be socioeconomic, racial, talents, abilities, the way we dress, just to really encourage and support the diversity that's among us. Interreligious dialogue and understanding are encouraged. We don't teach religion, but we certainly don't stifle conversations when it comes up appropriately in whether it's current issues or whether it's social studies courses, or English courses, or science courses, biology, the critical probing of religious issues, and really, again, with the premise being what we do in a way that we learn from one another and are respectful of one another. The collegial and participatory decision-making as practice is one that comes directly from the Sisters of Loretto and their philosophy that those who are going to be affected by a decision need to be a part of making that decision. So we try to be real faithful to not making a decision that affects the students unless they somehow have a chance to participate in the discussions and the pros and cons in making those decisions. That's true. I think that's the best way to say it is that you look at who's going to be affected by the decision and then you try to involve them in the process so that it's, again, a we-ownership. Responsible freedom is expected. That's probably the kids' key phrase. They love the responsible freedom. The fact that freedoms are a given here. You don't have to earn them, but they're there. Now, sometimes you lose them if you don't deal with them responsibly. So we encourage them to deal with the freedoms responsibly in order to maintain them. And active open communication is a way of life. Again, just the way we handled that situation that you referred to in the letter. I mean, that was not something that only 1 or 2 people knew about. We shared what was appropriate across the community and all participated in that. The second section is about what the teachers talk about more often, and providing a creative, flexible, and intellectually stimulating learning environment where we understand education holistically, where learners are encouraged to strive for excellence at their own pace and are challenged to discover and develop their fullest talents, where learners experience a variety of teaching and learning styles. And we do a lot of encouraging the teachers to be aware of different learning styles and to try out different teaching styles. And different teachers will have different styles, and different students match better with some teaching styles than others. But we try to be sensitive to the fact that students have different learning styles, be that active, more reflective, more concrete, more abstract, the different intelligences. If you've read in the articles about spatial intelligence, musical intelligence, emotional intelligence, you know that there are different ways that students thrive in the classroom. Motivation occurs cooperatively rather than competitively. Again, rather than having a cutthroat competition where there's winners and losers, we like there to be a cooperative environment where everyone comes out a winner. Learning how to learn is important as what one learns, and mutual evaluation is an integral and ongoing part of the learning process. We do a lot of evaluating here. We have people evaluate themselves, we have people evaluate each other. The students not only evaluate when you come to parent conferences next week, not only will the teacher be giving you an evaluation of the student's work, the student will have already filled out a self-evaluation, and there could be conversation about how the student perceives it and how the teacher perceives it. And the students participating evaluating the principal, they evaluate the curriculum, they evaluate the courses, and it's just a process that we all engage in. And frequently the faculty will sit down at the end of the year and we'll look at this philosophy statement and we'll talk about where we've been strong, where we've been weak, and where we need to refocus our attention. Learners are challenged and supported in their struggle and search for meaning. I think we try to do it throughout the school. I know Mary does a lot of that. She works with students. I know the council does a lot of that. I think the academic advisors do that. And the ground is laid for seeing all of life as an educational venture. And then finally, we strive to prepare learners for responsible participation in their society by encouraging critical thinking, not just regurgitating facts, but really analyzing situations and thinking critically of a broad worldview, an awareness of global interdependence, a passion for social justice, and a commitment to be change agents in the creation of a new future for themselves and others. And again, as we look at our curriculum, we try to get the students involved in those bigger kinds of questions that makes their learning relevant for them. 8 o'clock, is that my, okay. What I'd like to do now is switch a little bit, just to tell you a little bit of the history of the school, because I think it's important to know not only the story of the philosophy, but the story of the founding of the school. And those early beginning years when we were acting with out of a lot of passion, and maybe not always a lot of realism. But I've said often, Mary, if I knew then what I know now, I probably never would have done it. But I'm glad I didn't know then what I know now, because I'm glad we did it. Does that make sense? It's something that I would never have traded having been a part of, but there were times when I was like, wow, what did we get ourselves into? So the passion of the beginnings, the challenges and sacrifices along the way, and the commitment that it's engendered for a future. When we first would go to foundations that first year, we were founding the school, and we would talk about we needed money for a particular program. And they'd shake their heads and say, you just hit the ground running. You know, come back in some 10 years and you've got a track record. Then we'll talk. We'll come back in 15 years and you have a track record. It's like, we need the money now. But I've told Kathy, now's the time to go back to some of those foundations and say, we have a track record now. We have 15-year history. And it's time for some of those foundations that were just kind of watching us with a leery eye to kick in and support us. The idea of KCA, and it was originally Kansas City Academy of Learning, which got changed by a petition from the students in a board meeting back in 1994, where we got the of learning. But the idea was born June 1st, 1984, in Mary Statz's basement. And we decided to do it. There were 11 of us at the time, faculty, staff members, who realized Loretto was closing and we needed to continue this tradition, this philosophy. And we decided to do it. We didn't have a location. We didn't have anything. We had the people and the passion. But we located space at Trinity United Methodist Church, which is down on 620 East Harper Boulevard. I called the pastor there just to say, you know the Midtown area. Do you know any place we might look to for our school? And he said, well, we were just talking at our board meeting last night of ways we could creatively use our church space, our education facility. Why don't you come take a look at it? So we did, and the plan plan then was we'd be there a year or two, and then we would outgrow it, and we would find our own space and have our own building. Well, the year or two turned into 6 years, but it was a real gift to us to have that space. And that summer we got our incorporation as a 501c3 not-for-profit corporation. We created our bylaws and wrote our first personnel policy. And on about mid-July, I think it was, we originally were going to just be a high school because most of the faculty members on this project were high school teachers. And one family came who had a senior son who said, we want Lindsay to go to your school, but we also want our daughter Lee to go, and she's only a 7th grader. So if you'd consider making it a middle school and a high school, we'll enroll both kids. And we looked at each other and said, we could probably do that, to have our first 2 students. And so they gave us a $1,000 deposit on each of those 2 students around July 1st, and we proceeded. About mid-July, I think the enrollment was up to 10. And we sat down and we looked at each other and we said, do we keep going, or do we say this is a nice idea that's not going to float? And we said, well, we believe it will work, we're going to keep going. What we understand is in this first year we're all willing to make the sacrifices necessary. Our salaries are the variable. We'll pay our rent, we'll pay our bills, we'll do what we have to do, and whatever's left we'll divide among the faculty on a percentage kind of basis. So, going full steam ahead, August was a busy month, and we opened our doors on September 4th with an enrollment of 38, and ended that year with an enrollment of 49, which meant our variable salary started out the first month being 59% of what we made the previous year. By the end of the year, with 49 students, we were able to pay ourselves, I think it was 91% of what we made the previous year, which meant for the total year, our gross salaries had been 75% of what we did in the previous year, which weren't very competitive salaries to begin with. That's how we funded the school that first year. Also, here we were going into a church, and churches don't very often come equipped with science labs. And we knew that we wanted to have a college preparatory curriculum and be accredited by the Center. We had to have a science lab. And so the Sisters of Loretto agreed to float us a $5,000 interest-free loan. And the church agreed to let us take one room and get the plumbing in and get this science lab started. So we had a science lab that's probably as big as half of this room. But we had, from the very beginning, physical science, biology, chemistry, physics, the whole 9 yards. We started the year using the folding chairs that belonged to the church and didn't have much else. That was about it. And by October, we were able to acquire some of this secondhand furniture from the old Loretto school, and we could go out there and take what we needed, which was limited by the amount of space we had at the church. Because the rooms weren't very big. What would you say one of the rooms was? About 10 feet by 10 feet?
Yeah.
And they were divided by accordion separators, you know, so you could sit in one room and really listening to an English lecture and hear a social studies discussion to this side and an art discussion to that side. And we could sit in the student lounge, which is outside those 3 rooms, and learn all 3 things at the same time. One of the things that worried me was we were starting in a new school and we had no provisions at all for lunch. And what were we going to do? Well, the church fed had a lunch for the poor people of the neighborhood on Mondays. They said we could join them for that. We still didn't have anything else to do the rest of the week. And Craig Guntherly, one of our students, came up, flipped over the yellow pages down in the Mobilteria, gave them a call, got them coming the next day, and came until about, was that until last year that stopped? Well, we were Mobilteria's customer for 14 years. And high time that tradition ended, but it was thanks to a student who was resourceful enough to even know that it existed, let alone to take the initiative to call it in. We had a student who wanted to start a publications class because he wanted us to have a school newspaper. He went to the French teacher and said, I'd like to do independent journalism, produce a student newspaper. Well, he still had 3 or 4 other students being in this independent journalism class with him, and then he said, well, if we have a newspaper, you have to have pictures, and I've got a darkroom equipment at home. I'll bring and donate to the school if we can find a place to put it. Well, he scouted around and found a closet, which was the air conditioner closet, heating units and everything, and a little corner back in the space that we had to go to the church and negotiate. And we set up a darkroom back in this corner of this closet where all this other equipment is. But we got the Phoenix started, and it's gone every year since then. We established our coordinating board, which I already talked about. We even established a scholarship fund that very first year and had students on who were able to attend with financial aid. One of our primary goals and one of our greatest prides was that by March of that year, we were fully accredited by the North Central Association as a continuation of the organization of the Royal School. We had our first annual auction. It was called the Grape and Gavel Auction. We held it over at Unity Church, was that what it is? Also the Unitarian.
Also
Church. Yeah, and we made $6,000 that first year. And I think we've increased every year since then. But now we're up there making around $25,000. But we've done it all 15 years. We had a theater department. We had fall and spring plays, starting that very first year. Gave the plays down in the fellowship hall of the church. We graduated 6 students, had our graduation ceremony in the Rose Garden of this park. I told you about the faculty salaries being our variable to survive. 6 students went to France with a French teacher over the spring break. And so we had a pretty successful year. And at the end of that year, to prepare for our second year, we took all the things that we had learned and put them into a handbook. And so the KCA handbook that gets updated every year now started out that second year with putting down everything we figured out and worked went into the handbook. And the things that, as we develop things now, we usually try them now and make sure they work before we put them in the handbook. We did it for a year and say, oh, that's good, let's put that in the handbook. So the handbook's getting to be pretty thick these days. The second year, we started out the year with doing tours of the city to get acquainted with the neighborhood, the midtown, and the downtown area. We participated in the Hyde Park Festival, which I think we did this year. We decided to make ourselves known in the Hyde Park neighborhood because that's where we were, and our students were tour guides for the homes on tour. And we'd be assigned one house, and our kids would be there. They'd go learn the spiel and wear their KCA T-shirts, and everyone would come back and we were so impressed with these kids who weren't. I mean, it was totally up to them, spontaneous. We hadn't groomed them at all. It was like, here, go do this, and they did it and did a fine job. We started that year with 45 students and ended with 52. But that year, we tried to encourage the faculty to stay, so we actually offered contracts. And we said, this year we won't do this variable thing, we'll offer you a contract for X amount of dollars. But the first thing we knew, we were looking at a $31,000 budget deficit. It was like, how are we going to do this without having that little variable package in there when enrollment wasn't as high as we thought? Because we were dreamers. We thought enrollment would be 90 by the third year. We're still aiming for 90. But one of the little miracles that came along was Sally Firestone. I don't know how many of you know Sally Firestone, but she is she used to work for IBM, and she's retired from IBM now. She was one of the victims of the Hyatt Regency skywalk crash. She's now part of collegial. And when she got her legal settlement for that, she established a foundation. And I said to Sally, who'd been a long time friend of mine, I said, you know, you're new at needing to give money away, and I'm new at needing money, and they can make a team. And she just sort of smiled, and it wasn't long till she said, why don't you put together a proposal, and here's the information I want. And I'd like to make a $22,000 challenge grant to the school. If you can raise $22,000 this year, I'll match it with $22,000. So we went about it in that little community of 45 families. We raised $22,000 and had it matched and managed to get the faculty paid that year. Our smallest graduating class was 86, 87. We had 3 graduates. And a ceremony at the Loose Park with standing room only crowd. Amazing. Because all the passers-by came to the graduation. So we had lots of folks there. But we also, I can't remember which years were which. We had another year where I remember starting the year where the board had hassled over the summer with the low enrollment. Kathy, it was always a perennial question. And again, it was one of those decisions that students, parents, faculty, and the community members are making together. But we went to the faculty the first day of school and said, enrollment's not where we thought. The only way we get it this year is if you're willing to voluntarily give back 10% of your salaries. And you know they did it. It was just one of those remarkable things that wouldn't happen today, but it happened in the passion of the moment. the 1987, 88, just prior to that year, my friend Sally Firestone, our friend Sally Firestone, came to me and said, you know what, I think you really need to get this thing off the ground is you need a development director. And I know you can't afford it, you're too small to have one, but what if I fund a development position for you? And so she began in 1987, 88, funding a development position for us, that she's continued to fund all these years. And the downer of that was that was a year of low enrollment, and we were looking at a pretty huge budget deficit. And Lord, it's like we had a development director, we hadn't had time for that development director to do the work she needed to do to get enrollment up. And yeah, we were looking at, can we stay open? And when the board sat in, I think it was a October, November meeting, said we have to have a contingency plan because we may have to close the semester. And so we had this best and worst case scenarios of how we would, what we would do if we had to announce we had to close. Well, there was no way I was going to close a school that we had given so much hope to. And so we came up with a plan whereby the faculty would, once again, was asked to make contributions from their salaries. The parents were asked to dig deeper into their pockets for annual giving. The students came up with a proposal where they did like a walkathon, but instead of walking, they did community service. They got sponsors for their community service. And they raised money by doing community service and getting pledges to support that work. And they earned a piece of it. Sisters of Loretto, I called them, and they came in with a $15,000 gift to us. And Sally was pretty impressed with all that, so she made up the difference. So we made it through that year, and on we went. That was also the year I was finishing up my doctorate degree, which was sort of serendipitous because the focus of the doctoral work was the school and its philosophy, and it sort of had the pressure I felt to get it done before the school might close on me. Also, by doing it, it gave me a better understanding of what we were doing, why we were doing it, how much I believed in it. And I really put energy and vision back into the school. 1988, 89, we were pretty excited to have made it through 5 years. 89 and 90, January of 1990, we learned from the church they were needing their space back, and they were ready for us to move on, and we had to be out by June 1st. I think we negotiated July 1st. And so starting in January, we started looking at various buildings and places where we might move to school. We located this building in March, and it was in just wonderful condition, wasn't it, Mary?
Oh.
Ceilings were falling, floors were warped. We just stood down in what's now the art lab, stood in about a half an inch of water talking to the owner. And it was a mess. It was truly a mess. And fortunately, we had some people on the faculty who were artistic, creative, visionary types who could see possibilities in buildings. I would have said, no way. But they began to say, this is really cool. We could do this, and we could do this, and we could do this. And by June 1st, we purchased the building with owner financing and started. I think we had 3 or 4 work days that summer. Faculty, students, and parents all came together. First, we cleaned out the building, and then we did some painting, and the construction workers came in. Our art teacher had a construction operations. She was our chief construction engineer. And then on, I think it was July 14th, we all participated in moving the things that we had acquired at the church, getting them all moved over here at a moving day. And lo and behold, by September we started school, and by the second week of September had we call it a school warming, inviting the public in to see the transformation we made on the school. So that was a pretty exciting time for us, and this was a castle to us at that point in time, after having been in the church. 1990-91 was the year we added 6th grade. We had just been 7 through 12, but we had families say some of the elementary schools were ending at 5th grade, and they were looking for a place. We just added 6th grade. They knew 3 students that would enroll. So we said, sure, we can do that. 3 students, that sounds good. So we started with the 6th grade in 1990-91, and the first 6th grader graduated not this past year, the year before that, and then our second 6th grader graduated, our second class of 6th graders graduated last year. It goes on and on. We had funding to get our parking lot blacktop and get the basketball court lined and get the sand volleyball court in. And that helped us with our physical education possibilities. It's always interesting to advertise for a PE teacher and then bring somebody in and show them a little weight room, where she didn't have any weights in it at the time, it just was a little room. I say, could you create a PE program for us? So I think done an amazing job of creating a PE program without a gymnasium. That year we had some donations to put billboards up. Some of you may remember seeing our billboards that we had around the city at one point in time. I'm going to cut this short when you're ahead at 8 o'clock. But then our 10th year was another celebration. We went through the transition of my needing to go part-time, so we did a couple of years with a sort of administrative team where Mary became vice principal and Del director took on some of the responsibilities, and I was part-time. Then I didn't realize I couldn't keep doing that, and the school needed a full-time principal, so we hired Sue Nagy, who was here, did a wonderful job in the transition time. Giving leadership in school, and then now we're to Mary in our 15th year. And if you want to know more details and stories, just put a nickel in and I'll keep talking, but I won't do that to you right now. But I do want to say that, just in summary, and I look back on it, I think it was real fortuitous and real smart of us, and I'm real proud of the fact that we started the Academy Report that very first year. We've had 3 issues of the Academy Report every year of the 15 years. Well, we have 2 more to go this year. We've had 15 options. With the kids in fitness, we've had 15 yearbooks. And all the 11, 12 years I was in Loretto, we only had 2 or 3 yearbooks. They didn't always get out. We had a yearbook every year. Sometimes paperback, only 15 pages, but we have the yearbooks. We've had 15 years of theater productions and have always been a strong point of the school. We've had the open houses that were traditionally started that first year. The Phoenix, I talked about the student who started that, and the publications class still does the Phoenix. We've had 15 graduation ceremonies, and I don't know, probably now about 120, 130 graduates. Our first 10 ceremonies were in the Rose Garden, and then we got chicken about fighting the weather, and we moved inside since then. We've had financial aid to grant each of the 15 years. I thought we'd only had 12 years in the Bolteria. We have 14 years in the Bolteria. And we did Mary's mock trials were another thing that we did pretty faithfully. The first one was being we did it actually in the courthouse downtown. And we took the school down there and sat in an actual courthouse and had mock trials. So it's been an adventure. And like I say, it's real thrilling to see people continue to come to the school and valuing and believing in the school, and the more I think we get to understand the philosophy, and that is kind of, like I said, the glue that holds us together, and that's our rootedness. That's what makes the whole thing work. So I'm happy to share with you and turn it back to you.
Thank you so much. On that note, I have a fundraising idea. Why don't you publish?
Our next meeting is November 10th, and I will send postcards out, probably just a week.
Well, we want some. Do we need to be both?
Well, this was in this one.
Well, I know,
But it was farther,
That's
that's right.
This one will go out.
We'll go right at so maybe that's enough. And then Carol Eschen and Maggie Dahlmeyer will be the faculty guests